one moment. Yep.
So ready? Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming all to this event. Today, my name is Danny Putra, and I'm currently the graduate student in counseling psychology program, and also currently I serve as the graduate assistant here at Purdue Asian American and Asian Resources and Cultural Center. And today I'll be collaborating with Dr. Kasiana Warfield, who just earned her PhD in clinical psychology. And she is one of the staff therapists at the Purdue CAPS, a counseling and psychological service. And she's also a mental health liaison for the Purdue AAAARCC. And we also have Manabu Takatani, who currently serves as the program coordinator here at Purdue AAAARCC. So with this program today, my goal is to kind of share my findings or my literature review about the discrimination against the Asian international students. And then I'll also get a brief introductions about how we can respond individually and collectively to the discriminations. And I will then turn a time to Dr. Warfield and also Manabu to share their knowledge about being able to respond individually and as a community. I also want to, before we start, I also want to acknowledge that, eventually the recent studies specifically talk about discrimination against the Asian international student is very, very limited. And if you can see later that all the authors also coming from the Asian American community. And even in terms of those participants, in terms of diversity, ethnic diversity in participant of that study is also very limited, mostly coming from East Asian students or some South Asian and some Southeast Asian community. So we know that that seems to be limited in terms of describing the diversity of the Asian countries in general. And hopefully by kind of sharing today, by kind of sharing this knowledge, it could give the empowerment to the Asian international student community, as well as those of you who are thinking about or planning of wanting to be an ally for this community in the future. And so for the beginning, I think I just want to share a little bit about statistic about international student in general in the US, as well as the one at Purdue. So if you can see from the slides that the Asian international student is actually make up almost 77.7% of total international student that is enrolling in the US higher educations. And most of the students from Asian countries coming from China, India, Saudi Arabia, and South Korea. And for Purdue, for Purdue itself, actually Purdue is one of the few university in the US that hosted at least 10% of that total number of international students that come into the US. And from that 10%, from the total that international students at Purdue, that enroll at Purdue, almost 73% are coming from different countries in Asia. So I think that also tells how big this population is, even in our Purdue campus community. And then Huang and Choi in 2014 talks about the adjustment process and also the stress factors that experienced by the Asian international student here in the US. They talked about some pre-arrival stress, applications to the university, applying for the visa, preparation for the traveling and the traveling itself that can be stressful. But then also when they arrive at in the US, they'll also have to deal with another stressful situations like struggling with the language, the educational system that might be different from the one that they experience at home. And they need also to build social network and support. They have to keep the financial stability, looking for housing. And the last thing that we are going to talk about today is discrimination. Now, of course, the question would be why discrimination would be such a stressful experience for the international student, but specifically for the Asian international students, because the literature like mentioned about like how some, maybe not all, international students in general may have a limited understanding of historical context of United States as the racialized society, and therefore when they tend to come to the U.S. with this colorblindness ideology, thinking that the United States is very accepting, like have equal opportunity, and it's like a country that will give you, that treated people equally and not seeing race as important. And the second part also, I found that like some of these students might be part of the majority in their own country, and they also have that certain privileges. And then when they're coming to the US, they may not realize that they become part of, or they've been categorized as one of the minority group in the US. And that become something that they need to have to go through some adjustment process in that way. And discrimination experience can be very sensitive to them because they probably never experienced that before in their own like country. And the third thing that I found is it seems like the globalizations and also exposure to the media in different countries about, you know, racial tension that happened in the United States, also very, it probably very partial. It's not explaining a lot, like telling the whole story. So what they know is, even for me, who is like Asian international student, I'm from Indonesia. And what I know when I came here to the US like years ago was race only happened, you know, between like black and white, so communities. So I never thought that, you know, me part of the like Asian community here will also be discriminated in some way. So, and I think knowing that it is helpful to kind of know about the historical context and the recurring racialization, the theme of Asian American community in the US. So the article from Iftikhar and Muzius in 2018 talks about like how there's a certain narrative or view from the white majority in the United States seeing the Asian American community, even from like years, 100 years ago. Some of them are, I'm just mentioning here, is that Asian American community is being seen as monolithic, like lumping all diverse ethnicity, cultural language, and the background into one group based on the features and the skin color. And the second is talk about Orientalism, which is like a Western centered kind of view about the Asian, which is, you know, it's like if we're thinking about Western as the center of the world, and then thinking of the other side of the world, which is the eastern part of the world, as somewhat strange otherness, which means like they have like this different custom, they have this different language, you know, names are different, so it's rather strange to them and not adhering to the Western norm, which just make it kind of seeing them as, you know, somewhere others, that it's like unique. Well, not just unique, but it's just like strange. And the third is like the yellow perils. It's like a narrative that's saying that the Asians are menacing and endangering to Western society. And these kind of perspective often leads to like xenophobia, exclusion, and also violence. And the last is they talked about the model minority, which is very pervasive here in the US, thinking or seeing the Asian community as a successful community, hardworking, very intelligent, and therefore they don't need any support. They're also very obedient, but eventually this community is continuing being seen as perpetual foreigners. So understanding the historical context is important. And as you can see later in examples of discrimination that's being experienced by the Asian international student, that you may be able to reflect those themes in the discrimination experience can be related to some of these historical concepts that we talk about here. As you can see, this is some of the articles that I can, compile for talking about the experience of discrimination among Asian international students here in the US. As you can go through the point, I was just pointing out that I'm trying to put them in order from, from the earliest time until the latest years. So if you can see it, I'm sure there's even like some studies that happens before that, as before the 1990s. But then like when I compile it in this way, we can see that even that discrimination to this particular community has been happening in the last 30 years, and it continues to happen. So it is very pervasive, and the fact that there's only very limited studies on this, because people who pay attention to this particular communities is also like people coming from the same like community. Like mostly if you see the author here, like almost 80% are all from the Asian community themselves. And if you can see also from this point, several points that languages and accent seems to be one of the major factors that make this community is being discriminated. And an interesting point also is the last bullet point that you see there. So it's a very latest research that I found that actually the Asian American student was mistakenly as Asian international student, and they're being discriminated by their white peers. So it's again coming back to the idea of monolithic concept that the white majority may be seeing all people who share the phenotypes or features of the Asian. They thought everybody's the same. So it doesn't matter where they're coming from, either they're already an American citizen or they are Asian international, they still got discriminated. These are some of the examples that I found about the discrimination against the Asian international student. I will not read them like word by word, but I will give you some time to just glance through it and then see if you can relate these themes of what's happening back to that historical, some of the concept in the historical racializations of the Asian American communities. And this is the second slides. And I think by also thinking about these examples, as I mentioned before, there's this theme of language being different, the names being different, like the custom is different, and also like there's feeling of threatening to the job, to the intelligence, like and life, thinking them to be like a terrorist. It's all coming back to the idea of how dangerous the Asian to again like the Western society. And I also want to think about like the importance of just if the Asian international can see when they see all these different kind of examples, maybe they may or may not be aware of these as part of discrimination, but sometimes when they do experience this, what they feel is the after effect or feeling embarrassment, like low confidence, self-esteem, shameful, and also feel being wrong, but they may not be understand like why. What is this act? I think that's important to know. And next is I will briefly kind of sharing about the relationship between the mental health and the perceived discrimination, specifically in this Asian international student community. So I want to say that there are relationship that is sort of straightforward, but this first slide is a little bit more complex. So maybe I just try to explain like one of them, and then if you have any more questions about this, I can explain to you more. But basically, so for example, the third bullet point talk about like perceived discrimination is significantly positive, have correlation with the suicide ideations in general. But we also want to think about the if someone coming from the Asian community feeling that they are have this burden, have us thinking about that they are being a burden for someone else at that particular point in time, they feel like, I don't want to bother someone else. I don't want to be a burden for other people. And then at the same time, they feel like they're not connected. They don't belong to any peer group. They don't belong to any communities. And at that particular time, if they receive discrimination, and that increasing their chances of having the suicide ideation. So that's the idea. So the complex interaction here is pointing out to the idea that we're not only considering perceived discrimination as like environmental factors that impacting the students, but also we need to think about like what the individual factors might be involved in this interaction. So both individual factors and both environmental factors can interact to lead the negative mental health outcome for these particular students. This is like pretty straightforward kind of impact. So discrimination is basically predict depressive and post-traumatic stress symptoms for the Asian American in Asian communities. Discrimination also have a positive association with anxiety, depression, and psychological stress. At the last point, the bullet point talked about the Asian Indian international student with low color blindness and sense of belonging will experience significant racism related to stress. So what I say is that if the Asian Indian, specifically for Asian Indian international student who become more exposed to the racial situations in the US and understanding the racial structures that happen here in the US, and they will experience more racism related stress. And the author also find that the female student experience higher racism related stress than the male. I think this finding is specifically applied to Asian Indian international students. Borrowing from the minority stress theory that I found, the minority stress theory was coming from the LGBTQ community. But if we want to look at the Asian international students as a minority part of this community, then they experience like two types of stressors. Like the first is the distal stressor, which is stressor that comes from the external event and experiences outside of the person, which often come in terms of microaggression. It can be called a micro assault, like the outright name calling. It could be the micro insult, like telling like the Asian student that they can speak English well. Oftentimes the person may not feeling that it's an insult, but they feel somewhat uneasy and unsure what's going on, but they really don't have maybe not have an idea why they're saying that, with someone asking them that or telling them that. And then the third is like the micro invalidations. It's basically trying to like normalize things that happens to this international student. So for example, if someone telling them that they ask them if they can speak English well, and then if someone kind of normalizing that, saying like, oh, that's normally happen here. Everybody will ask that question if they're seeing like, you know, an Asian student, and if eventually it's part of the micro invalidations kind of thing. And the second is also want to emphasize is the proximal stressors. So the stressors, it's not just happening when you experience the act of discrimination itself, but also I think borrowing from the stress inoculation theory in psychology, when you're receiving continuous stress and discrimination, you will start to internalize the messages that you receive in your everyday or interpersonal interaction. So all this value and messages about, you know, that you're being different, that you are maybe inferior in some ways, or that you are a strange person, you can start to begin to internalize those value and messages. And those things can be part of the way that you see, you perceive yourself, your image. And it can lead to self-doubt, identity confusions, and also feelings of inferiority. And this is the last slide from my end. We talked about like how the individual and collective response to discriminations. We talked about the role of resiliency. So resiliency is the quality of being able to survive, to navigate and thrive in the face of the adversity. And in this case is discrimination. But again, resiliency can only be referred in the presence of stress. So if there is no adverse event or stress that the individual experience, we cannot call that resiliency. So it has to be in the context of stress. And again, like Myers, who talks about the minority stress theory, he kind of divided into the resiliency both as individual resiliency and community resiliency or minority coping. What he's trying to mention is individual resiliency is more like personal agency, like mastery of certain skills, and also the ability for an individual to identify the risks and protective factors that help them to navigate or develop quality that make a person become more or less resilient. And if some of you need, I have what I call like micro intervention toolkit. I can share with you, or I can send it to you if you would like to. This is a way of like counteract the microaggressions. It coming from one of the famous psychologists who also his research is mostly talk about like microaggressions. But then like individual resiliency also been seeing, we want to be careful with the focusing more on individual resiliency because it often seeing criticized as like Western approach. And in that sense, meaning that if we are putting all the responsibility on individual, when in fact there are some individual who may not be, who have not equal access to all these different, maybe like protective factors in some way. So we don't want to focus our attention. If, for example, somebody not being resilient doesn't mean that they cannot be resilient, or is this it is their solely their responsibility to be resilient, but it may not be that they don't have the same access that other individuals may have. So that's why the Meyer talks about like community resiliency or minority coping, where we're focusing more on the community intervention, how the community can provide those resources that can be helpful to individual, or the community can create a policy or even like social network, connecting individual with other people so they can be more resilient. I think that's where the community approach coming in. So I will give the time to Dr. Warfield to talk about more how individual can cope with discriminations, and sharing her experience working with the students who experience probably discriminations. And then I will later, we'll give time to Manabu to talk about how the ARC roles in terms of giving these resources to Asian international students and connecting them with other organizations on campus. So thank you.
Yeah. Denny, are you able to, maybe you're trying to do that. Stop sharing. I don't know how to stop you. Okay. Thank you. Um, yeah, thanks, Denny. I really appreciate the way you applied a number of those models to this concept because it gave me some common threads I'm going to try to pull through into my presentation. So hopefully that feels helpful. Where did you all go? There you are. I can't really see a ton of people, and I don't know if people have their screens on, but certainly if there are questions that people have, particularly when we get down to like the skills that I'm going to talk about, as well as how to access resources, I guess put it in the chat or just like unmute and talk. That's totally fine. So I'm hopefully going to take about 15 minutes to run through, acknowledging how difficult discrimination can be. Um, as Asian international students, how can we be effective in taking care of ourselves and promoting resilience? So, like Denny said, I am a staff therapist at CAPS, and I'm also the liaison to the ARC from CAPS. And so I'm really excited to be a part of this. I wanted to first talk through the impact of discrimination as I've sort of seen it from a psychological standpoint. I think this will sort of echo a lot of the things that Denny had said. So certainly, I think the biggest one can be a sense of isolation, especially in that you're now a marginalized or a minority member in a majority dominant, potentially foreign culture. And so I think isolation can be a big thing, certainly distrusting others and not knowing who you can trust. It can be really disruptive to daily life, especially if there are certain spaces you may be avoiding or spaces that you're especially vigilant in if you're expecting to feel discriminated against. It may require you, when you encounter discrimination, to change your even career or academic trajectory, to avoid that, to be in different locations, to look at different positions so that you can be protected. Certainly, it can have physical health consequences. Like what I want to highlight with this slide is the experience of discrimination is a trauma, and trauma lives in the body. So it can show up in terms of cardiovascular health. It can show up in terms of sleep disruption, appetite disruption. And so it can really negatively impact how you're physically feeling, as well as emotionally and psychologically feeling. Certainly symptoms of anxiety, depression, and stress, intrusive thoughts, difficulty concentrating and working, and therefore difficulty progressing academically, certainly anger and maybe desires to retaliate or to have something change. I think exhaustion is a big one in that it can feel like it's an unrelenting, ongoing stressor. And certainly fear of future incidents, either for yourself or for loved ones, or for just the community going forward. And I think it can also translate from being an individual issue to disruptive of your relationships with people that you really care about, right? So, when your psychological health is not going well, it's harder to show up in those relationships the way that you want to. One thing I wanted to point out with this slide, I intentionally made some of the bullet points yellow, or gold, I guess, because these are ones that I've heard directly from students and other community members here. So it is here. It is a thing that's happening. It's not just a thing that's happening on the news. So unfortunately, it has arrived, and Purdue is not an exception to that. So I just feel like that makes it a little bit more real. But acknowledging that discrimination is a trauma, we need to identify ways to manage the impact of that, not only in the moment. So I guess when Denny was talking about those distal stressors, right, like those actual external events of discrimination happening to us or that we witness, but also how can we long-term manage the onslaught or the proximal stressors of discrimination. And so I'll hopefully be giving you some directions for that, and definitely interrupt if you have questions or if anything doesn't feel clear, because I'm going kind of quickly. I'm actually going to set my timer because otherwise I'm not going to keep to the time. So I want to take in a moment a spotlight to distress tolerance skills. Now, this is a set of skills from a form of treatment called dialectical behavior therapy. So it's beginning to be applied to a lot of different mental health issues. But this module in particular, I think, is useful because it focuses on surviving crises. So how can I get through an event or a series of events that doesn't really have an immediate solution that I individually can impact or problem solve for, that I just need to tolerate so that I don't do something or have something happen to me that would be extremely harmful in the long run. So I'm going to focus on 4 skills that I think have been the most helpful in these situations and for the students I've worked with, but there's an entire set of them. And there's even more modules to DBT that Dr. Linehan has developed that are helpful. So what I can do is after I'm done speaking, I'll put link for the actual full video I did, I think like a year ago now, on discrimination survival skills specifically, when we were really seeing the uptick begin in hate crimes towards Asian and Asian American students and people. So I'll link that. But I'm going to focus on 4 today. The other piece that I think Manabu will speak more to is how important community and connection is at this time. So I know, for example, in the immediate aftermath of the shootings in Atlanta, we offered a discussion group that I think was ultimately very meaningful. And so finding spaces where you can be vulnerable and share about how you've been impacted about discrimination with other folks who also understand, whether that's within your race or ethnic group, or if it's just in general with friends, is really, really important. Finding pride in your identities is really protective for experiencing discrimination. And so I won't be speaking to that as much, but I think I wanted to mention it explicitly. And I also wanted to instill a little bit of hope. So I've been so fortunate that students, Asian and Asian American students, have come to me and have been willing to share space with me, whether it's for an hour, like in a student hour, or if it's through ongoing individual therapy or group or what have you. And they've really been vulnerable and shared and built community and resilience and felt empowered. And so I think in engaging in that work, I have seen folks move away from a trauma response into a more accepting space, into getting involved in advocacy for themselves and their community, and then feeling very efficacious in being able to manage the impact of discrimination and prejudice. And then at its best, I've seen folks in real solidarity within their own community and with other marginalized communities on campus. So I am hopeful that there are things that you can do to mitigate this for yourselves. And so I really encourage you, and I hope that that helps you to approach these issues differently. Okay. So I'm going to start first with 2 pretty powerful skills, tip and self-soothe. Let me pull up my thing for myself. So tip is one of my favorite distress tolerance skills because it's fast acting and they're easy to do. And I think when you're, these are most appropriate when you're experiencing a high intensity emotion in response to an immediate event, and you need to prevent yourself from engaging in behaviors that might be ultimately very harmful. And so the first one that I think is really effective is tip the temperature. And so what this really involves is putting either a cold pack, a bag of icy water, or if you just have access to running water, just immersing this part of your face in cold water and holding your breath for about 30 seconds. What this does is trigger a dive response, which is what causes your physiological arousal to come down. And it communicates to your body that you can calm down, and it will reduce your emotion very fast. You may have to do it a couple times for it to be lasting, but this is the one that I hear clients coming back to again and again as like helpful immediately in the moment. Another one that's pretty accessible no matter where you are is some sort of intense physical activity. So depending on your mobility and your ability, you need to figure out what gets your heart rate up. And also if that's safe for you to do, assess that with a doctor as well. And so I'm thinking an intense burst of exercise for 15, maybe 20 minutes at most. So if you can't go to a gym, is it going up and down your stairs? Is it running around your building or your house? Is it running around your block? Is it doing weightlifting, right? So if you don't want to leave your home, if you have a set of weights or something like that. Sometimes it can be, I don't know the term for this, but using like an elastic band and doing like sort of the tension exercises. So if your mobility is pretty limited or you just don't have access or don't feel like running. So again, what this can do is it can tip your physiology to help you to calm down quickly in the moment. And then you can think a little bit clearly. The P's of tip are paced breathing and paired muscle relaxation. So sometimes it's helpful to start with temperature or intense exercise and then follow up with paced breathing or paired muscle relaxation when you can sort of think through that. So paced breathing is exactly what it sounds like. We're really trying to intentionally slow down our breaths. And to do deeper breathing, so diaphragmatic breathing, where your stomach is coming out as you breathe in, rather than your chest, because this is shallow if it's coming up here. And trying to particularly pay attention to breathing out more slowly than you're breathing in. So maybe it's 5 seconds in and 7 seconds out. So what this does is it tips your physiology into a more relaxed state. It activates your parasympathetic nervous system and calms you down. And then finally, paired muscle relaxation, which I will again send some links in the chat as well for examples of audio guided exercises of this. But essentially what this is you're pairing the deep breathing with alternating tensing and relaxing each of the muscle groups. And it has that, again, same effect of tipping the emotion so that you can calm down. The next effective thing that you can do is to self-soothe. And this might be something that you're already familiar with. Essentially, think the five senses that you have. Like, what can you see, touch, hear, smell, taste that will feel comforting and soothing to you? So I know for me, it's nostalgic food. Like, there's certain sensations and textures about sinigang that like automatically trigger me to feel very relaxed and safe. So I don't know what it would be for you, but my suggestion to you is to identify what that is ahead of time before you're in a crisis state, and maybe consider, how can I make this accessible and portable for me, right? Let's say that this happens when you're not at home, right? And you need to soothe in the moment. So what can I carry with me that's accessible for each of these senses that will allow me to calm and soothe myself? So I know for me also, like, certain music will trigger that feeling. It's just looking for the music that will trigger an opposite feeling to maybe the fear or the anger I'm feeling in the moment. Or maybe it's certain senses. Manalboot says that you're in the waiting room. I don't know what that means. Or maybe it's certain touches, like, is it certain textures or I don't know, plushies or something. So thinking about that ahead of time and creating a self-soothing kit is really helpful. And then I put wash and repeat, meaning like you may need to do these repetitively to feel the effect, and that's okay to take the time to do that. Okay. The other two skills that I'm going to spotlight are improve and wise mind accepts. So these are really useful for maybe when you feel calmer and you're ready to try to transform the moment in some way, either with improve and trying to improve the moment and make it a more positive or meaningful one, or with accepts to distract from the distress in the moment until you can get to a place where you can do other things that are more helpful. Let me just scroll down in my thing so I can give some examples. So with improve, we're thinking it's DBT really loves their acronyms. So with improve, the I is imagery. So what can you imagine or visualize that's going to help you to feel safe? So maybe like a safe space, like a vacation spot, or being with family or a certain person. Like, what can you visualize, or can you imagine that the hurt is sort of draining out of your body in some way? How can you engage imagery in your head to make you feel safer in that moment? I know one that I've heard people use a lot is like building like a barrier around themselves, so that they feel protected, even if they're not necessarily protected in that moment. M, meaning. So can I find a purpose or a meaning to a painful situation? So maybe not necessarily saying things like everything happens for a reason, because that can be very invalidating, but like looking at what are you learning about yourself in that moment? What are you learning about others? Are there any positive aspects of what happened? Maybe people rallied together after when you disclosed that this happened to you, and you found like, I know who supports me in those moments. So whatever you can grab onto. Prayer. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a religious thing, but if it is religious, that can be a good place of resilience. But even just speaking to a higher power, or someone that you visualize, that you trust, to ask for strength or to turn things over to them in some way, or even just your ideal self, whatever that looks like for you. Are relaxing. So this is similar to self-soothe. Like, what can you do to allow yourself to relax in that moment and feel soothed? So stretching, yoga, massaging your neck or your scalp. Maybe it's taking a bath or a shower. That's worked for a lot of folks I've talked to. One thing in the moment. So it can be really helpful to be mindful and focus on just one activity, particularly when you're distracting. You can have intrusive thoughts about the discrimination come in. So maybe thinking about, how can I keep attending to what I'm sensing as I'm distracting? Like maybe I'm distracting with Netflix. How can I attend to the show? What can I pay attention to about the characters so that I can stay in the moment? Vacation. And so a brief vacation, right? Like, is there a way to set things down for the day rather, or an hour or 30 minutes? Is there a way to change your scenery so that you can feel refreshed? Maybe it's just getting in bed and pulling the covers over your head. What can you do to have a break from what you're experiencing? And then finally, encouragement of yourself and rethinking the situation. So maybe it's cheerleading yourself that you can handle this and you can get through this, or that you can stand it, or even just acknowledging it's not permanent. So I often say to myself, like, nothing personal, nothing permanent, nothing perfect. And that allows me to sort of let go in the moment. Okay. And then finally with accepts, this is really about distracting. So can we distract with activities? So you need to know for yourself what's really capturing for your attention, whether it's music, media, people, physical activity, the internet, TikTok. Like, what is it going to be that's going to draw your attention? Contributing is C. So this is really effective. Like, are you volunteering at an animal shelter, soup kitchen, a homeless shelter? How can you donate some money if you have access to that, or your time or your energy, to help someone else feel nice, even if it's just being a listening ear for someone else? This feels really culturally like relevant, like going back to like collectivistic values and being family oriented or being group oriented. So I think this one could be really effective, but it doesn't have to be big. The other C is comparisons. So sometimes social comparison is not effective, but sometimes thinking about how maybe some people have it worse than you can help lift your mood for a moment. But I also just think about comparing yourself to maybe where you were a month ago or a year ago and noticing the growth there. That can be really resilient for yourself. With different emotions. So again, like, how can I watch something, see something, experience something that will make me feel something different, even if the different is a different kind of fear, like watching scary movies. It could be watching romantic comedies and it makes you cringe and you're like, that feels different. It could be listening to soothing music, like more like ethereal stuff, or maybe it's just, watching something funny, right? So how can we trigger a different emotion? Pushing away. So I think it's okay to give yourself a break from ruminating about the event. So maybe it's blocking those thoughts and images from your mind in some way by focusing on something else. Um, it's okay to not think about it and not anticipate the problem for a little while. Um, and then with other thoughts, so maybe it's puzzles, maybe it's reading something that's really complicated and diverting, maybe it's work. That's okay too. Maybe it is math problems, like whatever is going to really require you to focus. And then finally, with sensations, um, whether it's going out in very cold or very hot weather, taking a hot or cold shower, listening to super loud music. Um, Again, using ice or cold water over your hand or your mouth, um, whatever it is to feel something different that will capture your attention. Oh my gosh. Okay, so I'm gonna go. I'm gonna hopefully go quickly. Sorry, Manabu. I just wanted to identify. Okay, with distress tolerance, you can sort of tolerate the immediate event in the moment, but ultimately you're going to need some other support outside of yourself, because this is an ongoing issue. And unfortunately, as a member of a marginalized group, it might continue to be an issue when you're in this kind of society, right? And so I think seeking that out ahead of time is really important. So I wanted to highlight some stuff that is available to you as a student. So certainly I do office hours or student hours every Wednesday at 4 during the semester. I anticipate I'll continue doing that over the summer. And then once a month, those are actual programming such as this, or next week we're doing meaning making gratitude around graduation. So there's points of support and community there. At CAPS itself, some new initiatives that we've done this semester, I believe, are different group therapies. So it can be a source of community, but it can also be a source of intervention and treatment. So we have the International Student USO group. So again, it's about like, how can we build resilience? How can we support each other? How can we take care of ourselves? But it's specific for international students. It's not limited to Asian international students, but I think there are some shared themes in the international experience. There is a BIPOC student USO group. So if you identify as someone of color, that's also open to you. Both of those are, actually all three of these groups are mixed grad and undergrad students. So it's open to all. And then a group that I run with one of my colleagues, Mamie Butler, who is the liaison to the BCC, is the Multicultural Women's Empowerment Group. And here we're really focused on building that resilience and self-care. So it could be an appropriate group if you are someone who is a cis woman, a trans woman, a non-binary person, who is also a person of color. So consider, spread the word, and we anticipate running that in the summer as well. We also have brief individual therapy, and brief meaning goal focused. And so not necessarily a long-term option, but a good option for tailored one-on-one work. We have medication management through psychiatry, if that feels appropriate. We also have many psycho-ed workshops on things like anxiety, depression, mindfulness, and other things. And skills groups like we have a DBT group as well. We also have on-call emergency services 24/7. So all you have to do is call the main number that I have listed here. And then we have a link to self-help resources as well, which have different apps such as WellTrack and Mood Tracker and other things that you can start with if you feel like a little apprehensive about approaching CAPS. So you can see how those are effective for you and see if you can integrate those into your life. So I just wanted to briefly go over how you get access to the services because I feel like I always get that question, which is fine. And I'm open to getting that question in the future. But the main way to get engaged is to schedule a brief phone screen. These are 15 minutes. You can schedule them same day or next day, or farther out if you need to. And you just call our main line and say, I'm interested in services. I want to schedule a brief phone screen. It's a 15-minute call, rapid assessment. Here you can indicate if you have therapist preferences, such as seeing someone of color or an Asian therapist. And then from that point, you either get a referral into one of our specific like group or workshop services or something in the community, or you go to initial consultation if it feels like there needs to be a deeper assessment. So then at that stage, it's more like an hour-long, 50 to 60 minutes assessment where we do gather more history and more things. And then from there, again, it can either be a CAPS referral to one of our services or a community referral. So I just wanted to give a broad overview of what this is. And this is my last slide. The light gray is all the things that CAPS offers, and the dark gray is all the things that different places on campus offer. So it's important to consider, like, do I need to double up? Do I need to figure out, is there something else in the community that feels particularly helpful for me? So you see the cultural centers, you see RecWell, you see various success centers and ODOs. So there might be something else that you're not thinking of that we can recommend. But again, you know, we do have all these different options at CAPS alone. So that's all I got. I'm gonna stop sharing. If there's any questions, go ahead and shoot it in the chat or let me know. I think there is chat. No, okay, there's nothing. So thanks, I'll turn it over to Manabu.
Sounds great. Thank you, Kashana and Benny, for the wonderful presentations. I'm going to be brief as we close out today's presentation time, but I'm going to be sharing about the ARC and the resources that we have available for you through that. So I'm going to share my screen. So one moment, please. All right. So as I mentioned, my name is Manabu Takatani. I'm the program administrator at the Asian American and Asian Resource and Cultural Center. So the ARC. The ARC is like a home away from home. So we're located at 915 5th Street in West Lafayette, Indiana, on the corner of 5th and Waldron Street. And this semester, our public hours are from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. on Monday through Fridays. So if you're ever in the area, feel free to stop by, hang out, use our spaces, and we welcome you to do so. So briefly, we are a team of 6, including several undergraduate students, as well as Denny, our graduate assistant, who is here with leading the presentation today. So ARC is a place of belonging. So we invite the whole campus community to be involved with our community here at the ARC. So we are a place where we learn, as you see in the picture above, which is a picture of our Lunch and Learn series, and down below, which is a picture of students hanging out using the spaces. Obviously, these pictures are pre-COVID. This year, our area is looking a little bit differently and social distancing is practiced, but hopefully when we get through this pandemic, we can return to a more normalized community where we can all gather once again. So as mentioned before, with the rise of anti-Asian discrimination and hate across the country, and even within our communities, our university has responded by releasing this letter and statement assigned by Dr. John Fitzgerald Gates, the Vice Provost for Diversity and Inclusion, and Dr. Pamela Sari, the Director of the Asian American and Asian Resource and Culture Center. And this is a letter of support for the Asian and Asian American communities as we navigate these difficult times. And this information is available on our website at Purdue ARC. And here's our website. So you can see different resources available to the campus community. As part of our resources, we do different programs throughout the academic year. And one in particular is called our speaker series, where we invite different guest speakers of diverse backgrounds and areas of expertise to share with the campus community. So some of them are coming from different backgrounds, including the arts and sciences and all the different fields that you can think of. So here you see an example from this month in April of 2021 with Sarah K. and Phil K. from Project Voice, and also on the right, you see an image of Jose Antonio Vargas, this poster where he talked about the undocumented Asian American experiences in the US. And alongside of the speaker series, we also do film series as well, where we show different aspects of the Asian and Asian American experiences. And on the screen here, we see posters of Minari. The middle is Chinatown Rising, which we just showed yesterday. And on the far right, we have the film poster for Happy Cleaners, which will be screened later this month of April. We also partner with student organizations as well. And we partner with the different Asian Student Union Board to host Leadership Series program, where we feature different guest speakers to encourage our Asian American and Asian student org leaders. And on the, so you can see two examples there on the screen. And we also partner with all their campus units as well. So on the far left, you see our partnership with the Career Center, and on the right, we see the poster with Realitea, which is led by Dr. Kashana Warfield here today. So just to conclude our time here with my portion, we have lots of different opportunities to engage with the community and be involved with one another in terms of communal support, and also branching out and meeting new people, and hopefully gaining a great support while you're here at Purdue University. So I'm going to turn it back, stop sharing and turn it back to Denny.
Well, thank you for sharing, Manabu. I think it's again like me introducing this topic, and then also connecting both of you to the students, to the community, and those who wanting to be an ally for this community as well. So hopefully, by knowing the two of you, they can have like this idea of who I can connect with, and how can I get resources to get help to get through these experiences. So thank you so much for both Dr. Warfield and Manabu. Thank you for collaborating with me today. And thank you all for attending this event. And you all have a great day. Thank you.